The lights were blinding, the studio buzz electric. Denzel Washington had done countless interviews over the decades, each one a finely tuned dance between poise, wisdom, and charm. But tonight felt different, not because the audience was bigger, or the questions deeper, but because something in him had shifted. At 70, Denzel had seen the peaks of fame and the valleys of grief. His voice was slower now, not from age, but from reflection. The host greeted him with a reverence usually reserved for presidents. The applause thunderous, but beneath Denzel's half-smile and folded hands there was a storm brewing, a heaviness he hadn't yet named. Maybe it was the recent loss of a friend, maybe it was the state of the world, or maybe, just maybe, it was something about Africa that had been tugging at him more than usual lately. As the interview began, Denzel spoke with the ease of a man who had earned his place. They asked about training day, about fences, about legacy and faith. He nodded, laughed, offered nuggets of wisdom. But then, right before the commercial break, the host dropped something unexpected. "Before we continue," he said, eyes sparkling, "we've arranged a little surprise. You received a call earlier today from someone very special. Do you know who it was?" Denzel blinked, lips parting. He hadn't expected this to come up. The host continued, "President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. He asked to speak with you personally." Denzel's shoulders tensed, his fingers curling slightly over his knee. There was a silence in the room. Even the audience hushed. Something changed in his face. He nodded slowly. Yes, he did. What could make a man like Denzel Washington, known for his composure, break on live television? What was in that call that cracked open something so deeply buried? The call had come just hours earlier. Denzel was in his hotel suite, sipping tea and watching the news. His assistant knocked gently and entered with a puzzled look. "There's a secure call for you, from the presidency of Burkina Faso." He chuckled at first. Is this a prank? But the call wasn't a joke, and the voice on the other end wasn't just a politician. It was a young leader with a calm, commanding tone that carried something ancient. "Mr. Washington," the voice began, "I am President Ibrahim Traoré. I hope you don't mind the intrusion." "No, not at all," Denzel replied, still bewildered. "How can I help?" "I needed to speak with you personally," Traoré said, "because your story saved someone I loved, and I believe you need to hear this now. Have you ever been told something so unexpected, so profound that it felt like the world tilted just slightly off its axis?" Traoré's voice softened. 23 years ago, a boy in a small village in Burkina Faso watched a film called Glory. He didn't speak English well, he didn't understand every line, but he watched your face, your pain, your courage, and he decided that even in poverty, even in injustice, he could stand. Denzel's throat tightened. "That boy," Traoré continued, "was my brother. He died a year later protecting a girl from being taken by rebels. He was only 13, but he said something to me before he died. He said, 'Be brave like that man. Tell the truth with your life.' I never forgot it." The line was silent. Then Denzel spoke, voice cracking. "Why tell me now?" "Because," the young president said, "you've spent your life giving us strength from across an ocean. But I believe you've carried a burden without knowing how deeply you've impacted lives you'll never meet. And today, I wanted you to meet one." Back in the studio, the interview resumed, but Denzel couldn't go on. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands shaking slightly. "I didn't know," he whispered into the mic. "I didn't know." The host reached out gently. "Would you like to share what he said?" Denzel looked out at the audience, eyes misting over. "He told me that my work mattered, that something I did decades ago changed a life. Maybe saved it, maybe gave it purpose." He paused, the weight of years pressing down. "We do this work, actors, storytellers, we do it and hope someone hears us. But we never know where the ripples go." Today one came back. "What does it mean to be seen by someone you never met? Someone whose life was shaped by your story?" Transitioning away from the bright stage, we find Denzel alone later that night in his dressing room. The mirror reflected not a star, but a man, questioning everything. He picked up the phone again and called his son. "John David," he said, voice low, "there's something we've never talked about. About why I really did Malcolm X. About your grandfather." There was a long pause. "I want to go to Burkina Faso," he said. "I think there's something there I've needed to face for a long time." "Are you sure?" his son asked gently. "No," Denzel replied, "but it feels like something's calling me. Have you ever felt pulled towards something, not by reason, but by soul?" As the night deepened, Denzel sat with memories of his own father, who had once told him, "You're not just acting, son. You're testifying." And for the first time in years, Denzel understood what that meant. 3 weeks later, under a blazing West African sun, Denzel Washington stepped onto the soil of Burkina Faso. There was no red carpet, no press swarm. Just a quiet greeting from a local minister and a small convoy waiting to escort him. The air was heavy with dust and promise. Denzel wore a plain linen shirt, khakis, and a weathered fedora that had traveled with him for decades. He wasn't here as a celebrity. He was here as a man chasing a thread of meaning, one that began in a movie trailer and ended in a boy's final breath. Have you ever followed a stranger's story only to discover it leads straight to your own heart? They drove hours outside of Ouagadougou, through fields of gold and clay, where children waved at passing cars and goats scattered into the brush. Denzel stared out the window, eyes scanning every village, every pair of eyes. He imagined that boy, Traoré's brother, watching glory in a makeshift theater, heart-pounding, hope-igniting. They arrived at a small village surrounded by baobab trees. The locals gathered silently. There were no chants, no demands, just respect. They had all been told who he was, and more importantly, why he was there. The village elder, a man in his 80s with lines that could tell 1,000 stories, approached. He didn't bow, he didn't speak English, but he placed his hand over Denzel's heart and nodded. Denzel bowed his head, overwhelmed. He wasn't here to be honored. He was here to understand what his work had awakened, to finally feel the weight of a role that had gone far beyond a script. How do you process knowing that your art helped birth someone's courage? The next day, President Ibrahim Traoré joined. Him, younger than Denzel's own children, Ibrahim carried himself with humility and fire. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I wasn't sure I could," Denzel admitted. "I wasn't sure I should." "You were called," Ibrahim replied. "That's all that matters." They sat in the shade of a clay wall, sipping sweetened tea. Ibrahim pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. "My brother wrote this the day before he died," he said. "It's the only letter we have from him. He couldn't finish it, but I want you to read it." Denzel opened the fragile page, hands trembling. "Dear Mr. Soldier from the movie," the letter began, "I do not know your name, but I want to be like you. You looked scared, but you stayed. You cried, but you fought. I cry too, but I will. Stay, if I don't see tomorrow, maybe you will. Please tell the world about us." The letter stopped there. Denzel couldn't breathe. Would you have the strength to carry a dream that was never yours, but became your responsibility? The two men walked to the edge of the village, where a stone stood. A memorial. Ibrahim's brother had been buried beneath it. No coffin, no plaque, just dirt and love. Denzel knelt and placed his hand on the stone. "I never thought a boy from across the world would hold on to a story I acted out in pain," he said, voice breaking. "And I never thought I'd come here to find healing." Ibrahim placed his hand on Denzel's shoulder. He never saw the movie again, but I think he'd be happy knowing the man who gave him hope came looking for him. They stood in silence. When grief and grace share the same space, do they cancel each other out, or do they deepen our capacity to love? That night, Denzel couldn't sleep. The air hummed with insects and whispers of history. He sat outside his hut staring at the stars. Somewhere his father was watching. Somewhere that boy's spirit lingered. He pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not a script, not a speech, just a letter to a boy he never met. "Dear young soldier, I was just pretending. But you were the real thing. You gave everything. I don't know if I deserve your words, but I carry them now. And I promise I'll tell the world about you. Denzel, have you ever felt more humbled by someone with far less than you, but far more courage? In the days that followed, Denzel visited schools, hospitals, and art centers. He watched children reenact scenes from his movies, some laughing, some crying, some staring at him as if they were seeing a myth come to life. But it wasn't fame that moved them. It was representation. They saw themselves in him, a black man who spoke with truth, who rose, who resisted. One child asked him, "Were you scared when you cried in the movie?" "Yes," he said softly, "but real men cry." The child nodded, wide-eyed. "My papa cries too." And just like that, healing passed down again. As the trip neared its end, Denzel stood with Ibrahim at a school built in memory of his brother. They had named it the House of Courage. Denzel placed his palm on the name carved in stone. "I want to do more," he said. "Not as an actor, as a man." "We don't need your money," Ibrahim said. "We need your voice. Keep telling the truth. Keep showing what strength looks like." Denzel looked at him, tears brimming. "I will." Have you ever realized too late that the most powerful role you'll ever play isn't on a stage, but in someone else's story? The jet landed at JFK to little fanfare, but inside Denzel Washington, something had shifted irrevocably. The dust of Burkina Faso still clung to his shoes, and the memories etched into the folds of his mind clung even tighter. He wasn't the same man who had left Los Angeles weeks ago. The world knew him as an actor, a legend. But now, all Denzel could think of was a boy with trembling hands and defiant eyes, who had watched a VHS tape of glory under a flickering bulb and decided to be brave. That wasn't fiction anymore. It was prophecy. Have you ever returned home and realized you no longer belonged to the life you left behind? The phone rang the next morning. It was his agent, voice buzzing with energy. "Denzel, CNN wants you. Anderson Cooper, a primetime special. They heard about your visit to Burkina Faso." "I'm not ready," Denzel replied, hesitant. "They said it's not about promotion. It's about legacy, about what happened over there. People want to hear it." He hung up and looked at his reflection, wrinkles deeper, eyes wiser. He thought about the letter, about Ibrahim, about that final promise. "I'll tell the world about you." Maybe this was the way. The stage was quiet. No cheering audience. Just 2 chairs, 2 cameras, and Anderson Cooper's piercing gaze. They started with the usual: career highlights, aging gracefully, the importance of faith. But then Anderson asked, "What happened in Burkina Faso that made you cry on live TV?" Denzel inhaled deeply, then let the silence hold. The camera zoomed slightly in, his hands folded, eyes downcast. "I met a boy who never got the chance to live out his story," he said, voice trembling. "But he gave me mine." Anderson leaned forward. "Can you tell us who he was?" "He was the brother of President Ibrahim Traoré. He died protecting someone from being taken by militants. He was 13. But before that, he saw glory. He saw me, and somehow he saw a version of himself in it. He believed he could be brave. He believed he had to be. What would you do if someone died believing you were a symbol of hope, and you only found out years later?" Denzel pulled the yellowed letter from his jacket pocket. "He wrote this to me. He called me Mr. Soldier from the movie. He said he cried, but he stayed. He said if he didn't see tomorrow, maybe I would." Anderson's voice cracked. "That's unbelievable." "No," Denzel said quietly. "That's what stories do. They move without us. They survive us. They plant seeds we never see grow." He wiped a tear from his cheek. "We live in a world where people need heroes they can touch. But sometimes what they need more is a mirror. That boy didn't need me to be perfect. He just needed to know that someone like him could stand." Have you ever realized you've been part of someone's miracle and never even knew? The interview clip went viral within hours. Celebrities reposted it. Students made tribute videos. Activists in Africa and the US spoke of the boy who wrote to Denzel. People across the world cried, not just for the boy, but for what the moment revealed. That representation isn't about fame, it's about legacy. It's about invisible lines that stretch across oceans, binding us in ways that transcend language and time. That night, Denzel received a call. A trembling voice on the other end said, "Mr. Washington, my name is Awa. I was the girl that boy died saving." Denzel's heart stopped. "I've waited so long to say thank you," she continued. "Because of him, I lived. I finished school. I work at a hospital now. I have 2 children. Every day I walk past that stone where his name is carved." She paused, voice breaking. "When I heard what you said on CNN, I felt like he was still alive, like he finally got the ending he deserved." Denzel couldn't speak. He sat in silence, hand over his mouth, the weight of her words flooding him. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from forgiveness, but from recognition. The next morning, Denzel drafted an open letter, not to the press, not to Hollywood, but to anyone who had ever felt unseen. He titled it, "To the Ones Who Stood Anyway." He wrote, "You didn't have cameras, you didn't have scripts, you didn't win awards, but you stood anyway. You faced fear, injustice, and death, and you held the line. This world will never fully know your names, but I do, and I promise to carry them forward, in every line I speak, in every role I choose. This isn't about acting anymore. This is about honoring those who had to be brave because no one else would. Would you change your entire legacy if it meant giving voice to someone who never had one?" The letter was read at universities, in churches, on protest stages. The hashtag, "He Stood Anyway," trended for weeks. Denzel turned down 3 film offers that month, not because they weren't good, but because they weren't right. Instead, he announced a foundation, The Boy Who Wrote to Denzel, dedicated to funding arts education and civic leadership programs across Africa and underserved US communities. And through it all, he kept the boy's letter in his pocket, folded, fading, but never forgotten. What would the world look like if we treated stories not as entertainment, but as seeds? A year had passed since the letter changed everything. World had moved on as it always does, chasing headlines and forgetting names. But Denzel Washington had not. Every day the letter stayed close. Every project he accepted, every speech he gave, every moment in front of a camera now passed through a new filter. Will this honor the boy who wrote to me? That question reshaped everything. Have you ever carried a single moment so deeply that it changed how you walked through every other one? The Academy Awards approached. Denzel hadn't planned to attend. He'd quietly stepped back from most industry events. But this time, something felt different. He wasn't nominated for a role. He hadn't directed anything that year. Yet an invitation arrived anyway, with a note handwritten by a board member. "This isn't about your films, this is about your voice. Please come." He agreed, but only on one condition, that he be allowed to speak. Not accept an award, not promote a project, just speak. He had something he needed the world to hear. One last performance, but not as an actor, as a witness. The lights dimmed, the audience stilled. The host introduced him. A man whose legacy no longer lives on screen but in hearts. Denzel took the stage. He wore a simple black suit, no tux, no flair, just a face full of lines carved from decades of feeling everything too deeply, and a paper in his hand. "I'm not here to entertain you," he said. "I'm here to remember someone most of you never knew." He unfolded the letter, the same, one that had been folded and refolded 1,000 times in his jacket. He read it again, slowly. "Dear Mr. Soldier from the movie." Silence filled the room like a sacred hush. "I've spent most of my life pretending," Denzel said, eyes searching the audience, "pretending to be kings and gangsters and soldiers, but the bravest role I've ever met wasn't mine." He paused. It belonged to a 13-year-old boy in Burkina Faso, a boy who watched a film and instead of dreaming of glory, he lived it. He stayed, he cried, and he gave his life to save someone else. People in the crowd began to wipe tears. Some lowered their heads. A ripple of reverence swept through the room. What if the greatest performance you'll ever give is one the world never sees? But heaven does, he went on. That boy didn't know fame. He didn't have followers or box office hits. But his courage, it traveled across oceans, it found me. And now I carry it, I have to. Because if a story can inspire someone to give their life, then that story better be worth it. He placed the letter back in his pocket. And so, I ask every one of you, before you pick up a camera, a script, a microphone, ask yourself, who will this reach? And what will it ask of them? Because someone out there is watching, someone out there is holding on to your words like a lifeline. Would you speak differently if you knew someone might live or die by your voice? He stepped down to a standing ovation, not because of charisma, not because of celebrity, but because in that moment, every person in that room saw what it really meant to matter. Later that night, backstage, he received a video message from Ibrahim Traoré. The president stood outside the school they'd built together, the House of Courage. Behind him, children played, laughed, learned. You did what? You promised, Ibrahim said. He is not forgotten. Denzel nodded, tears forming once again. Neither are you. The foundation grew. Chapters opened in Ghana, Haiti, Baltimore, Compton. Awa, the girl who had been saved, became its global ambassador. She traveled the world sharing her story, holding up the boy's photo, reminding everyone that one brave act can echo for generations. Denzel never took another role unless it aligned with the mission. He turned down biopics, action thrillers, even major studios. Instead, he began producing films written by young black storytellers, some of whom had never even seen a movie in a theater before. He called the initiative Project Stay, named after one sentence in the letter that still haunted him. You looked scared, but you stayed. Would you stay when fear tells you to run and history tells you it won't matter? Years later, at CSE, a small rural school in Mississippi, a boy stood at a podium holding his own letter. He was 12. He read, Dear Mr. Washington, I want to be like the boy you talked about. I want to stay too. When I get scared at school or when people laugh at my clothes, I think about him. I think maybe he's watching me. Thank you for telling his story. Now I know I have one too. Denzel watched from the back of the room. No cameras, no press. Just one man, changed by a letter, watching a new letter begin a whole new life. And in that moment, he whispered, he lived after all. Because some stories don't end when the credits roll, some don't fade when the lights come up. Some begin with a letter in the dirt and end in the hearts of strangers halfway around the world. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the trophies, not the roles, but the lives lifted by what we leave behind when we choose to stay.